In the interests of the brethren. Banquet night. Once in so often King Solomon said, watching his quarrymen drill the stone, we will club our garlic and wine and bread, and banquet together beneath my throne, and all the brethren shall come to that mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more, no less. Send a swift shallop to Hiram of Tyre, felling and floating our beautiful trees. Say that the brethren and I desire talk with our brethren who use the seas, and we shall be happy to meet them at mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more, no less. Carry this message to Hiram, excellent master of forge and mine. I and the brethren would like it if he and the brethren will come to dine. Garments from Bosra and morning dress, as fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. God gave the hyssop and cedar their place, also the bramble, the fig, and the thorn, but that is no reason to black a man's face, because he is not what he hasn't been born. And as touching the temple, I hold and profess, we are fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. So it was ordered, and so it was done, and the hewers of wood and the masons of mark, with fossil hands of the Sidon run, and navy lords from the royal ark, came and sat down and were merry at mess, as fellow craftsmen, no more and no less. The quarries are hotter than Hiram's forge. No one is safe from the dog whip's reach. It's mostly snowing up Lebanon Gorge, and it's always blowing off Joppa Beach. But once in so often the messenger brings Solomon's mandate, forget these things, brother to beggars and fellow to kings, companion of princes, forget these things, fellow craftsmen, forget these things. In the interests of the brethren. I was buying a canary in a bird shop when he first spoke to me, and suggested that I should take a less highly colored bird. The color is in the feeding, said he. Unless you know how to feed 'em, it goes. Canaries are one of our hobbies. He passed out before I could thank him. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a short, dark beard, rather like a Salem terrier in silver spectacles. For some reason his face and his voice stayed in my mind so distinctly that, months later, when I jostled against him on a platform crowded with an angling club going to the Thames, I recognized, turned, and nodded. I took your advice about the canary, I said. Did you? Good. He replied heartily over the rod case on his shoulder, and was parted from me by the crowd. A few years ago I turned into a tobacconist's to have a badly stopped pipe cleaned out. Well, well, and how did the canary do? Said the man behind the counter. We shook hands. And what's your name? We both asked together. His name was Louis Holroyd Burgess, of Burgess and Son, as I might have seen above the door, but Son had been killed in Egypt. His hair was whiter than it had been, and the eyes were sunk a little. Well, well, to think, said he, of one man in all these millions turning up in this curious way, when there's so many who don't turn up at all, eh? It was then that he had told me of his son Louis's death, and why the boy had been christened Louis. Yes, there's not much left for middle-aged people just at present, even one's hobbies. We used to fish together, and the same with the canaries. We used to breed 'em for color. Deep orange was our specialty. That's why I spoke to you, if you remember, but I've sold all my birds. Well, well, and now we must locate your trouble. He bent over my erring pipe and dealt with it skillfully as a surgeon. A soldier came in, spoke in an undertone, received a reply, and went out. Many of my clients are soldiers nowadays, and a number of 'em belong to the craft, said Mr. Burgess. It breaks my heart to give them the tobaccos they asked for. On the other hand, not one man in 5,000 has a tobacco palate. Preference, yes. Palate, no. Here's your pipe again. It deserves better treatment than it's had. There's a procedure, a ritual, in all things. Any time you're passing by again, I assure you, you will be welcome. I've one or two odds and ends that may interest you. I left the shop with the rarest of all feelings on me. the sensation which is only youth's right, that I might have made a friend. A little distance from the door I was accosted by a wounded man, who asked for Burgess's. The place seemed to be known in the neighborhood. I found my way to it again, and often after that, but it was not till my third visit that I discovered Mr. Burgess held a half-interest in Ackerman and Pernitz, the great cigar importers, which had come to him through an uncle whose children now lived almost in the Cromwell Road, and said that the uncle had been on the Stock Exchange. "I'm a shopkeeper by instinct," said Mr. Burgess. "I like the ritual of handling things. The shop has done me well. I like to do well by the shop." It had been established by his grandfather in 1827, but the fittings and appointments must have been at least half a century older. The brown and red tobacco and snuff jars, with crowns, garters, and names of forgotten mixtures in gold leaf. The polished Orinoco tobacco barrels on which favored customers sat, and the cherry-black mahogany counter, the delicately molded shelves, the reeded cigar cabinets, and the German silver-mounted scales, and the Dutch brass roll and cake cutter were things to covet. "They aren't so bad," he admitted. "That large Bristol jar hasn't any duplicate to my knowledge. Those 8 snuff jars on the third shelf, they're Dolan's ware. He used to work for Wimble in 1740, an absolutely unique. Is there any one in the trade now could tell you what Romano's Holland was, or Schulten's? Here's a snuff mull of George the First's time. Here's a Louis Quinze. What am I talking of? Trees. Trees, of course. Greater for making brand snuff. They were regular tools of the shop in my grandfather's day. And who on earth to leave 'em to outside of the British Museum now, I can't think. His pipes. I would this were a tale of virtuosi. His amazing collection of pipes was kept in the parlor, and this gave me the privilege of making his wife's acquaintance. One morning, as I was looking on covetously at a jacarna wood, cigarro, not cigar, cabinet with silver lock plates and drawer knobs of Spanish work, a wounded Canadian came into the shop and disturbed our happy little committee. "Say," he began loudly, "are you the right place?" "Who sent you?" Mr. Burgess demanded. "A man from Messine, but that ain't the point. I've got no certificates nor papers, nothin', you understand. I left him lodge owing him $17 back dues, but this man at Messine told me it wouldn't make any odds with you." "It doesn't," said Mr. Burgess. "We meet tonight at 7 p.m. The man's face fell a yard. "Hell," said he, "but I'm in hospital. I can't get leaf." "And Tuesdays and Fridays at 3 p.m., Mr. Burgess added promptly. "You'll have to be proved, of course." "Guess I can get by that all right," was the cheery reply. "Tuesday, then." He limped off, beaming. "Who might that be?" I asked. "I don't know any more than you do, except he must be a brother. London's full of Masons now. Well, well, we must do what we can these days. If you'll come to tea this evening, I'll take you on to lodge afterwards. It's a lodge of instruction." "Delighted. Which is your lodge?" I said, for up till then he had not given me its name. "Faith and Works 5837, the third Saturday of every month. Our lodge of instruction meets nominally every Thursday, but we sit oftener than that now because there are so many visiting brothers in town." Here another customer entered, and I went away much interested in the range of Brother Burgess's hobbies. At tea-time he was dressed as for church, and wore a gold pince-nez in lieu of the silver spectacles. I blessed my stars that I had thought to change into decent clothes. "Yes, we owe that much to the craft," he assented. "All ritual is fortifying. Ritual's a natural necessity for mankind. The more things are upset, the more they fly to it. I abhor slovenly ritual anywhere. By the way, would you mind assisting at the examinations, if there are many visiting brothers tonight? You find some of 'em very rusty, but it's the spirit, not the letter, that giveth life. The question of visiting brethren is an important one. There are so many of them in London now, you see, and so few places where they can meet." "You dear thing," said Mrs. Burgess, and handed him his locked and initialed apron case. "Our lodge is only just round the corner," he went on. "You mustn't be too critical of our appurtenances. The place was a garage once." As far as I could make out in the humiliating darkness, he wandered up a mews and into a courtyard. Mr. Burgess piloted me, murmuring apologies for everything in advance. "You mustn't expect," he was still saying when we stumbled up a porch and entered a carefully decorated anteroom hung around with Masonic prints. I noticed Peter Gilkes and Barton Wilson, fathers of emulation, working in the place of honor. Kneller's Christopher Wren, Dunkerley, with his own Fitzgeorge bookplate below, and Ben Sinister on the royal arms. Hogarth's caricature of Wilkes, also his disreputable knight, and a beautifully framed set of Grand Masters from Anthony Sayer down. "Are these another hobby of yours?" I asked. "Not this time," Mr. Burgess smiled. "We have to thank Brother Lemming for them. He introduced me to the senior partner of Lemming and Orton, whose little shop is hard to find, but whose words and checks in the matter of prints are widely circulated." "The frames are the best part of 'em," said Brother Lemming, after my compliments. "There are some more in the lodge room. Come and look. We've got the big Desaguliers there that nearly went to Iowa." I had never seen a lodge room better fitted. From mosaiced floor to appropriate ceiling, from curtain to pillar, implements to seats, seats to lights, and little carved music loft at one end, every detail was perfect in particular kind and general design. I said what I thought of them all, many times over. "I told you I was a ritualist," said Mr. Burgess. "Look at those carved corn sheaves and grapes on the back of these warden's chairs. That's the old tradition, before Masonic furniture spoilt it. I picked up that pair in Stepney 10 years ago, the same time I got the gavel. It was of ancient yellowed ivory, cut all in one piece out of some tremendous tusk. That came from the Gold Coast," he said. "It belonged to a military lodge there in 1794. You can see the inscription." "If it's a fair question," I began, "how much—" "It stood us," said Brother Lemming, his thumbs in his waistcoat pockets, "in an appreciable sum of money when we built it in 1906, even with what Brother Anstruther, he was our contractor, cheated himself out of. By the way, that ashlar there is pure Carrara, he tells me. I don't understand marbles myself. Since then I expect we've put in, quite another little sum. Now we'll go to the examination room and take on the brethren." He led me back, not to the anteroom, but to a convenient chamber flanked with what looked like confessional boxes. I found out later that that was what they had been when first picked up for a song near Oswestry. A few men in uniform were waiting at the far end. "That's only the head of the procession. The rest are in the anteroom," said an officer of the lodge. Brother Burgess assigned me my discreet box, saying, "Don't be surprised. They come in all shapes." Shapes was not a bad description, for my first penitent was all head bandages, escaped from an officer's hospital Pentonville way. He asked me in profane Scots how I expected a man with only 6 teeth and half a lower lip to speak to any purpose, so we compromised on the signs. The next, a New Zealander from Taranaki, reversed the process, for he was one-armed, and that in a sling. I mistrusted an enormous sergeant-major of heavy artillery, who struck me as much too glib, so I sent him on to Brother Lemming in the next box, who discovered he was a past district grand officer. My last man nearly broke me down altogether. Everything seemed to have gone from him. "I don't blame yer," he gulped at last. "I wouldn't pass my own self on my answers, but I give yer my word that so far as I've had any religion, it's all the religion I've had. For God's sakes, let me sit in lodge again, brother." When the examinations were ended, a lodge officer came round with our aprons, no tinsel or silver-gilt confections, but heavily corded silk with tassels, and, where a man could prove he was entitled to them, levels, of decent plate. Some one in front of me tightened a belt on a stiffly silent person in civil clothes with discharge badge. "'Struth, this is comfort again," I heard him say. The companion nodded. The man went on suddenly. "Here, what are you doing? Leave off. You promised not to. Chuck it. and dabbed at his companion's streaming eyes. "Let him leak," said an Australian signaller. "Can't you see how happy the beggar is?" It appeared that the silent brother was a shell-shocker whom Brother Lemming had passed on the guarantee of his friend, and, what moved Lemming more, the threat that, were he refused, he would have fits from pure disappointment. So the shocker went happily and silently among brethren evidently accustomed to these displays. We fell in 2 by 2, according to tradition, 50 of us at least, and were played into lodge by what I thought was a harmonium, but what I discovered to be an organ of repute. It took time to settle us down, for 10 or 12 were cripples and had to be helped into long or easy chairs. I sat between a 1-footed RAMC corporal and a captain of territorials, who, he told me, had had a brawl with a bomb, which had bent him in 2 directions. "But that's first-class batch the organist is giving us now," he said delightedly. "I'd like to know him. I used to be a piano thumper of sorts." "I'll introduce you after lodge," said one of the regular brethren behind us, a plump, torpedo-bearded man, who turned out to be a doctor. "After all, there's nobody to touch back, is there?" Those two plunged at once into musical talk, which to outsiders is as fascinating as trigonometry. Now, a lodge of instruction is mainly a parade ground for ritual. It cannot initiate or confer degrees, but is limited to rehearsals and lectures. Worshipful Brother Burgess, resplendent in Solomon's chair, I found out later where that too had been picked up, briefly told the visiting brethren how welcome they were and always would be, and asked them to vote what ceremony should be rendered for their instruction. When the decision was announced, he wanted to know whether any visiting brothers would like to take the duties of lodge officers. They protested bashfully that they were too rusty. "The very reason why," said Brother Burgess. While the organ backed softly, my musical captain wriggled in his chair. "One moment, worshipful sir," the plump doctor rose. "We have here a musician for whom place and opportunity are needed. Only," he went on colloquially, "those organ loft steps are a bit steep." "How much," said Brother Burgess, with the solemnity of an initiation, "does our brother weigh?" "A little over 8 stone," said the brother. "Weighed this morning, worshipful sir." The past district grand officer, who was also a battery sergeant major, waddled across, lifted the slight weight in his arms, and bore it to the loft, where, the regular organist pumping, it played joyously as a soul caught up to heaven by surprise. When the visitors had been coaxed to supply the necessary officers, a ceremony was rehearsed. Brother Burgess forbade the regular members to prompt. The visitors had to work entirely by themselves, but, on the battery sergeant major taking a hand, he was ruled out as of too exalted rank. They floundered badly after that support was withdrawn. The 1-footed RAMC on my right chuckled. "Do you like it?" said the doctor to him. "Do I? It's heaven to me, sittin' in lodge again. It's all comin' back now, watchin' their mistakes. I haven't much religion, but all I had I learnt in lodge." Recognizing me, he flushed a little, as one does when one says a thing twice over in another's hearing. "Yes, veiled in all glory, and illustrated in symbols, the fatherhood of God, and the brotherhood of man, and what more in hell do you want? Look at 'em," he broke off, giggling. "See, see? They've tied the whole thing into knots. I could ha' done better myself, my 1 foot in France. Yes, I should think they ought to do it again." The new organist covered the little confusion that had arisen with what sounded like the wings of angels. Rather red and hot, had finished, they demanded an exhibition working of their bungled ceremony by regular brethren of the lodge. Then I realized for the first time what word and gesture perfect ritual can be brought to mean. We all applauded, the 1-footed corporal most of all. We are rather proud of our working, and this is an audience worth playing up to, the doctor said. Next, the master delivered a little lecture on the meanings of some pictured symbols and diagrams. His theme was a well-worn one, but his deep-holding voice made it fresh. "Marvelous how these old copybook headings persist," the doctor said. "That's all right," the 1-footed man spoke cautiously out of the side of his mouth like a boy in form. "But they're the kind o' old copybook headin's we shall find burnin' round our bunks in hell. Believe me, I broke enough of 'em to know. Now hush." He leaned forward, drinking it all in. Presently Brother Burgess touched on a point which had given rise to some diversity of ritual. He asked for information. "Well, in Jamaica, worshipful sir," a visiting brother began, and explained how they worked that detail in his parts. Another and another joined in from different quarters of the lodge, and the world. And when they were well warmed, the doctor sidled softly round the walls and, over our shoulders, passed us cigarettes. "A shocking innovation," he said, as he returned to the captain musician's vacant seat on my left. "But men can't really talk without tobacco, and we're only a lodge of instruction." "Ah, and I've learned more in one evening here than 10 years." The one-footed man turned round for an instant from a dark, sour-looking yeoman in spurs who was laying down the law on Dutch ritual. The blue haze and the talk increased, while the organ from the loft blessed us all. "But this is delightful," I said to the doctor. "How did it all happen?" "Brother Burgess started it. He used to talk to the men who dropped into his shop when the war began. He told us sleepy old chaps in lodge that what men wanted more than anything else was lodges where they could sit, just sit, and be happy like we are now. He was right, too. We're learning things in the war. A man's lodge means more to him than people imagine. As our friend on your right said just now, very often Masonry is the only practical creed we've ever listened to since we were children. Platitudes or no platitudes, it squares with what everybody knows ought to be done." He sighed. "And if this war hasn't brought home the brotherhood of man to us all, I'm a Hun." "How did you get your visitors?" I went on. "Oh, I told a few fellows in hospital near here, at Burgess's suggestion, that we had a lodge of instruction and they'd be welcome, and they came, and they told their friends, and they came. That was 2 years ago, and now we've lodge of instruction 2 nights a week, and a matinee nearly every Tuesday and Friday for the men who can't get evening leave. Yes, it's all very curious. I'd no notion what the craft meant and means till this war." "Nor I till this evening," I replied. "Yes, it's quite natural if you think. Here's London, all England, packed with a craft from all over the world, and nowhere for them to go. Why, our weekly visiting attendance for the last 4 months averaged just under 140. Divide by 4, call it 35 visiting brethren at a time. Our record's 71, but we have packed in as many as 84 at banquets. You can see for yourself what a potty little hole we are." "Banquets, too!" I cried. "It must cost like anything. May the visiting brethren—" The doctor, his name was Keed, laughed. "No, a visiting brother may not. But when a man has had an evening like this, he wants to. That's what they all say. That makes our difficulty. They do exactly what you were going to suggest, and they're offended if we don't take it." "Don't you?" I asked. "My dear man, what does it come to? They can't all stay to banquet. Say 100 suppers a week, 15 quid, 60 a month, 720 a year. How much are Lemming and Orton worth, and Ellis and McKnight, that long big man over yonder, the provision dealers? How much do you suppose could Burgess write a check for and not feel? 'Tisn't as if he had to save for any one now. I assure you we have no scruple in calling on the visiting brethren when we want anything. We couldn't do the work otherwise. Have you noticed how the lodge is kept? Brasswork, jewels, furniture, and so on?" "I have indeed," I said. "It's like a ship. You could eat dinner off the floor. Well, come here on a by-day, and you'll often find half a dozen brethren, with 8 legs between 'em, polishing and renooking and sweeping everything they can get at. I cured a shell-shocker this spring by giving him our jewels to look after. He pretty well polished the numbers off 'em. It kept him from fighting Huns in his sleep. And when we need masters to take our duties, 2 matinees a week is rather a tax. We've the choice of PMs from all over the world. The Dominions are much keener on ritual than an average English lodge. Besides that— Oh, we're going to adjourn. Listen to the greetings. They'll be interesting." The crack of the great gavel brought us to our feet, after some surging and plunging among the cripples. Then the battery sergeant major, in a trained voice, delivered hearty and fraternal greetings to Faith and Works from his tropical district and lodge. The others followed, without order, in every tone between a grunt and a squeak. I heard Harauki, Inyaga Umbesi, Aloha, Southern Lights, from somewhere Punta Arenas way, Lodge of Rough Ashlars, and that Newfoundland naval brother looked it. 2 or 3 stars of something or other, half a dozen cardinal virtues, variously arranged, hailing from Klondike to Kalgoorlie, one military lodge on one of the fronts, thrown in with a severe Scots burr by my friend of the head bandages, and the rest as mixed as the Empire itself. Just at the end there was a little stir. A silent brother had begun to make noises. His companion tried to soothe him. Let him be, the doctor called professionally. The man jerked and mouthed, and at last mumbled something unintelligible even to his friend, but a small dark PM pushed forward importantly. It is all right, he said. He wants to say. He spat out some yard-long Welsh name, adding, That means Pembroke Docks, worshipful sir. We have good masons in Wales, too. The silent man nodded approval. Yes, said the doctor, quite unmoved. It happens that way sometimes. Hespera panta feres, isn't it? The star brings 'em all home. I must get a note of that fellow's case after Lodge. I saw you didn't care for music, he went on, but I'm afraid you'll have to put up with a little more. It's a paraphrase from Micah. Our organist arranged it. We sing it antiphonally, as a sort of dismissal. Even I could appreciate what followed. The singing seemed confined to half a dozen trained voices answering each other to the last line, when the full lodge came in. I give it as I heard it. We have showed thee, O man, what is good. What doth the Lord require of us, or conscience self-desire of us, but to do justly, but to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God, as every mason should. Then we were played and sung out to the quaint tune of Entered Apprentice's song. I noticed that the regular brethren of the lodge did not begin to take off their regalia till the lines, Great kings, dukes, and lords have laid down their swords. They moved into the anteroom, now set for the banquet, on the verse, Antiquity's pride we have on our side, which maketh men just in their station. A brother, a big-boned clergyman, that I found myself next to at table, told me the custom was a fond thing vainly invented, on the strength of some old legend. He laid down that masonry should be regarded as an intellectual abstraction. An officer of engineers disagreed with him, and told us how in Flanders, a year before, some 10 or 12 brethren held lodge in what was left of a church. Save for the emblems of mortality and plenty of rough ashlars, there was no furniture. I warrant you weren't a bit the worse for that, said the clergyman. The idea should be enough without trappings. But it wasn't, said the other. We took a lot of trouble to make our regalia out of camouflage stuff that we'd pinched, and we'd manufactured our jewels from old metal. I've got the set now. It kept us happy for weeks. You are absolutely irregular and unauthorized. Where was your warrant? Said the brother from the military lodge. Grand Lodge ought to take steps against. If Grand Lodge had any sense, a private 3 places up on our table broke in, it'd warrant traveling lodges at the front and attached first-class lectures to 'em. Would you confer degrees promiscuously? Said the scandalized Scot. Would you confer degrees promiscuously? Said the scandalized Scot. Every time a man asked, of course, you'd have half the army in. The speaker played with the idea for a little while, and proved that on the lowest scale of fees, Grand Lodge would get huge revenues. I believe, said the engineer officer thoughtfully, I could design a complete traveling lodge outfit under 40 pounds weight. You're wrong, I'll prove it. We've tried ourselves, said the military lodge man, and they went at it together across the table, each with his own notebook. The banquet was simplicity itself. Many of us ate in haste so as to get back to barracks or hospitals, but now and again a brother came in from the outer darkness to fill a chair and empty a plate. These were brethren who had been there before and needed no examination. One man lurched in, helmet, Flanders mud, accoutrements and all, fresh from the leave train. Got 2 hours to wait for my train, he explained. I remembered your night, though. My God, this is good. What is your train and from what station? Said the clergyman precisely. Very well. What will you have to eat?" "Anything. Everything. I've thrown up a month's rations in the Channel." He stoked himself for 10 minutes without a word. Then, without a word, his face fell forward. The clergyman had him by one already limp arm and steered him to a couch, where he dropped and snored. No one took the trouble to turn around. "Is that usual, too?" I asked. "Why not?" said the clergyman. "I'm on duty tonight to wake them for their trains. They do not respect the cloth on those occasions." He turned his broad back on me and continued his discussion with a brother from Aberdeen, by the way of Mitylene, where, in the intervals of mine-sweeping, he had evolved a complete theory of the revelations of St. John the Divine in the island of Patmos. I fell into the hands of a sergeant instructor of machine guns, by profession a designer of ladies' dresses. He told me that Englishwomen as a class lose on their corsets what they make on their clothes, and that Satan himself can't save a woman who wears 30-shilling corsets under a 30-guinea costume. Here, to my grief, he was buttonholed by a zealous lieutenant of his own branch, and became a sergeant again all in one click. I drifted back and forth, studying the prints on the walls and the Masonic collection in the cases, while I listened to the inconceivable talk all around me. Little by little the company thinned, till at last there were only a dozen or so of us left. We gathered at the end of the table near the fire, the night bird from Flanders trumpeting lustily into the hollow of his helmet, which someone had tipped over his face. "And how did it go with you?" said the doctor. "It was like a new world," I answered. "That's what it is, really." Brother Burgess returned the gold pince-nez to their case and reshipped his silver spectacles. "Or that's what it might be made with a little trouble. When I think of the possibilities of the craft at this juncture, I wonder—" He stared into the fire. "I wonder, too," said the sergeant major slowly. "But on the whole I'm inclined to agree with you. We could do much with Masonry." "As an aid, not a substitute for religion," the clergyman snapped. "Oh, Lord! Can't we give religion a rest for a bit?" the doctor muttered. "It hasn't done so. I beg your pardon all around." The clergyman was bristling. "Comrade," the wise sergeant major went on, both hands up, "certainly not as a substitute for a creed, but as an average plan of life. What I've seen at the front makes me sure of it." Brother Burgess came out of his muse. "There ought to be 12, 20 other lodges in London every night, conferring degrees too, as well as instruction. Why shouldn't the young men join? They practice what we're always preaching. Well, well, we must all do what we can. What's the use of old Masons if they can't give a little help along their own lines?" "Exactly," said the sergeant major, turning to the doctor. "And what's the darn use of a brother if he isn't allowed to help?" "Have it your own way, then," said the doctor testily. He had evidently been approached before. He took something the sergeant major handed to him and pocketed it with a nod. "I was wrong," he said to me, "when I boasted of our independence. They get round us sometimes. This," he slapped his pocket, "we'll give a banquet on Tuesday. We don't usually feed at matinees. It will be a surprise. By the way, try another sandwich. The ham are best." He pushed me a plate. "They are," I said. "I've only had 5 or 6. I've been looking for them." "Glad you like 'em," said Brother Lemming. "Fed 'em myself, cured 'em myself, at my little place in Berkshire. His name was Charlemagne. By the way, Doc, am I to keep another one for next month?" "Of course," said the doctor with his mouth full. "A little fatter than this chap, please. And don't forget your promise about the pickled nasturtiums. They're appreciated." Brother Lemming nodded above the pipe he had lit as we began a second supper. Suddenly the clergyman, after a glance at the clock, scooped up 6 sandwiches from under my nose, put them into an oiled paper bag, and advanced cautiously towards the sleeper on the couch. "They wake rough sometimes," said the doctor. "Nerves, you know." The clergyman tiptoed directly behind the man's head, and at arm's length rapped on the dome of the helmet. The man woke in one vivid streak as the clergyman stepped back and grabbed for a rifle that was not there. "You've barely half an hour to catch your train." The clergyman passed him the sandwiches. "Come along." "You are uncommonly kind, and I'm very grateful," said the man, wriggling into his stiff straps. He followed his guide into the darkness after saluting. "Who's that?" said Lemming. "Can't say," the doctor returned indifferently. "He's been here before. He's evidently a PM of sorts." Well, well, said Brother Burgess, whose eyelids were drooping. We must all do what we can. Isn't it almost time to lock up? I wonder, said I, as we helped each other into our coats, what would happen if Grand Lodge knew about all this? About what? Lemming turned on me quickly. A lodge of instruction open 3 nights and 2 afternoons a week, and running a lodging-house as well. It's all very nice, but it doesn't strike me somehow as regulation. The point hasn't been raised yet, said Lemming. We'll settle it after the war. Meantime, we shall go on. There ought to be scores of them, Brother Burgess repeated as we went out the door. All London's full of the craft, and no places for them to meet in. Think of the possibilities of it. Think what could have been done by masonry through masonry for all the world. I hope I'm not censorious, but it sometimes crosses my mind that Grand Lodge may have thrown away its chance in the war almost as much as the Church has. Lucky for you the Padre is taking that chap to King's Cross, said Brother Lemming, or he'd be down your throat. What really troubles him is our legal position under Masonic law. I think he'll inform on us one of these days. Well, good night all. The doctor and Lemming turned off together. Yes, said Brother Burgess, slipping his arm into mine. Almost as much as the Church has, but perhaps I'm too much of a ritualist. I said nothing. I was speculating how soon I could steal a march on the clergymen and inform against Faith and Works, number 5837 E.C.